So on the 20th of April in 1999, these two young men went to school for the last time. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were the perpetrators of the Columbine High School massacre, and they killed 12 students, a teacher, wounded 24 others, and then killed themselves, all before lunchtime on that school day. That incident sparked a massive, or several massive debates about gun control and the use of antidepressants with teenagers, but also with whether or not violent media equaled violent behaviour. Now, as a school teacher, this is a subject that I find particularly interesting, especially considering that today the more violent video games that a boy has, the cooler he is at school. So I hear my students talking about them a lot. So I was interested in the question, does exposure to media violence increase an individual's likelihood of engaging in violent behaviour? Now, the paper I'm going to be looking at is Violent Media Content and Aggressiveness in Adolescence, a Downward Spiral Model by M. Slater, K. Henry, R. Swaim, and L. Anderson in 2003. Now, this study, the rationale behind this study was that there haven't been many experiments that look at selective exposure as a cause of violent behaviour, so students who seek out violent media. Which will then equal violent behaviour. Previous studies include three done by Linen, Lepper, Fling, Van Schvee and Weigman, and those three studies did not differentiate between violent and non-violent media. The Anderson and Dill study in 2000 did and found a positive correlation between violent video games and violent behaviour in adolescents, but the Johnson, Cohen, Smiles, Kaysen and Brooks study in 2002 was the first study that had a look at adolescents as opposed to children. So none of them really looked at selective exposure. So this study encompasses many of those ideas, however, differentiates between violent and non-violent media. The aim of this experiment was to test a downward spiral model on the relationship between youth, violent media and aggressive behaviour in youth. And the downward spiral model is a negative feedback cycle. So as you can see by the diagram, those three purple stars are negative implications of particular activity. So if we start with, if we go back and we have a look at the first one, say that is fatigue and the inability to cope with stress. And as a result of the inability to cope with stress, we now are more fatigued and we have trouble sleeping, and more stressed because we have trouble sleeping, and because we have trouble sleeping we are more fatigued, and the cycle starts all over again. So that's a downward spiral model, also known as a negative feedback loop. You're just stuck in this loop of negativity and negative consequences that does not go anywhere. It was hypothesised that youth who engaged in violent and aggressive behaviour sought out violent media, and also those who partook in violent media then exhibited violent behaviours. So if you were a violent youth, you sought out violent media, you became more violent. You sought out more violent media, and the cycle continued. And the other way proved true as well. You were curious, you sought out violent media, you became violent, which made you seek out more violent media, hence the downward spiral. The participants were 2,550 middle school students from 20 different schools across America, and this study was conducted over 2 years. The students were in years 6 and 7 when they completed the first survey, and 46 of the participants were male. The participants were required to complete a survey at 4 separate times within a 2-year period, and this survey used a Likert type scale of measurement where they looked at 1 being never or rarely, and 5 being frequently, always, very often, etc. And it measured things like violent media content and use, how often did they play violent computer games or watch violent movies, aggressive behaviour, did they engage in it, did they watch it, time, so the time between surveys, and this differed significantly between schools, and they also looked at covariates such as gender, internet use, age and sensation-seeking behaviours. The findings of this were that the students became less aggressive over time. Also, that students with high levels of aggression on the second survey increased their levels of violence and aggression over time. And the rate at which aggressive behaviour changed over time differed between students. So some students were more aggressive at a faster pace, others were slower, others were not at all. Males are more aggressive than females was one of the things that came out of the study as well. I can't say that that surprised me, given that testosterone is generally the aggression hormone and males do have that in greater capacities than women. But I found that interesting that there were less females in the study. There were less males in the study than females, and yet they were still found to be more aggressive. And students with higher levels of internet use increased their use of violent media faster, and students were more likely to display aggressive and violent behaviour when using violent media. Now, I believe that comes from the fact that the internet allows us to look at just about anything we can find and anything we want at our fingertips, and these kids have access to the internet on their mobile phones and iPads, so they can wake up at 2 a.m. and mum and dad are in bed and they can Google whatever they want. So, conclusions and implications of this. The results largely supported their downward spiral model, which I personally put a lot of faith in, and this is why I think this paper is the most important one. You can't look at violent media as a absolute, it is not the only cause of violent behaviour, but it makes sense to me that students or adolescents that exhibit violent behaviour seek out violent media. Again, that is reinforced by the media and their environmental stimuli. The limitations of the experiment was that the sample of students was not a random selection. They were self-nominated, so that could include some bias there, as not all facets of America were represented within the adolescent population. And again, the self-selected students can cause bias because students who are introverted or having anger issues would not put themselves forward for this. Provisions for internet use, but not all over media or violent video games, so that needs to be broadened. And self-reported surveys can create bias, as there can be a greater chance of the students doing the participants doing what they think the researchers want. The focus was also on adolescents and not children. So that wraps up that paper, and I found that to be the most important and most engaging purely because of that downward spiral model. So thank you.